I didn't expect to wake up to my firewood on the HOA president's Instagram story, burning cheerily in her fire pit while she sipped wine. The caption read, "Nothing beats rustic heat." My stomach dropped faster than the temperature outside. That stack wasn't just wood. It was a week's worth of warmth, 2 hours of axe work, and the last decent thing left on my property that Karen hadn't already tried to regulate, fine, or steal. That's when it hit me. She hadn't just taken firewood. She'd taken my time, my labor, and now she was laughing about it publicly while I sat freezing on my own porch. The embers in her post weren't the only thing smoldering. My patience, already running thin from her petty inspections and citations, finally burned out completely. 3 times in a month. That's how often the firewood had gone missing. The first time, I thought it was a misunderstanding. The second, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was one of her landscapers or a neighbor. But the third? That was deliberate. That was a message. Her smug little caption confirmed it. She thought she could take whatever she wanted because she had a clipboard and a badge that said, HOA President. That morning, I stood at the edge of my property line in boots still frosted from the night chill. My breath came out in visible clouds across the split-rail fence. Karen was lounging in her hot tub with 2 of her HOA board friends, holding mimosas and laughing while the fire roared beside them. She didn't even glance at me. She didn't need to. She knew what she'd done. That was the part that stung most. She wasn't hiding it anymore. "Morning," I called, pretending not to notice the firewood. "Cold one, huh?" She finally turned her head. "Oh, it's cozy here," she said, gesturing toward the flames. "You should try better insulation in that cabin of yours. Poor planning." She laughed and clinked glasses with her friends. That fire was burning with the very logs I split yesterday evening. The ones I stacked by the old oak tree. The ones I had been planning to use to warm my kitchen while I cooked dinner tonight. Now, they were crackling away to keep Karen's champagne fingers warm. I didn't say another word. Just turned and walked back toward my workshop, every step on the gravel sounding like gunshots in the silence between us. I went inside and closed the door gently. Locked it. Then went straight to the bottom shelf of my tool cabinet. That's where I kept a few of the more industrial supplies, stuff I rarely used unless something really needed fixing or sealing. 1 can of expanding foam insulation sat there like an answer to a prayer. High pressure. Fast expanding. Weatherproof. And so sticky it could ruin tools if not cleaned properly. If someone burned it inside a fire pit, let's just say it wouldn't end pretty. It wasn't illegal. I wasn't setting a trap. I was just reinforcing my property. From now on, every log that left would come with a little surprise. My land, taken without permission, was going to carry a little surprise, something to remind her that country folks don't forget, and they sure as hell don't forgive when you mess with what keeps them warm. By noon, I had hollowed out 6 fire logs carefully, like coring an apple. I drilled from one end, scooped out the middle, then slowly injected the foam. It filled each log like a time bomb, light on the outside, ready to erupt once exposed to heat. When it dried, I sealed the ends with a little sawdust and glue. They looked perfect, freshly chopped, almost too good not to steal. I built a stack and left it right by the fence line. It was bait, no question. But I made sure not to say a word about it. Let her make the first move. Let her take them with that same smug satisfaction. Let her build another fire and show off again online. This time, I'd be watching. That night, I set up one of my wildlife trail cams, pointed straight at the fence. I adjusted the angles, so it would catch the corner of the yard where the logs were. I even left a wheelbarrow beside them, just to make it easier. That's the thing about folks like Karen. They don't expect consequences. They're so used to getting their way, they forget to check if the bear is actually asleep before they poke it. Around 2 a.m., the camera caught movement. I was wide awake anyway, sipping coffee and watching a live feed from my laptop. There she was, in a fuzzy bathrobe and slippers, pushing the wheelbarrow. No shame. Not even a mask or hood. She looked both ways like she was crossing a street, then started loading the logs. 5. 7 of them. Enough for a full fire. Then she wheeled them back the same way she came, like it was her personal supply shed. The next morning, I woke to the faint smell of smoke and the unmistakable sound of panic. It started as a bang. Then came shouting. High-pitched, panic shouting. By the time I stepped outside, I saw a plume of weird gray foam rising above the privacy hedges. Karen's fire pit was oozing like a busted can of whipped cream. One of her HOA friends stood frozen, holding a marshmallow stick. The fire pit had split down the middle from the pressure. One side had buckled. The foam had erupted and scorched the edge of the patio tile. A lawn chair was stuck in it, completely fused. Karen's scream could have curdled milk. I watched from the porch, stone-faced, as they tried to stomp it out, poke it with shovels, and finally just gave up and started spraying it with a garden hose. That didn't help. Made it worse, in fact. The foam kept expanding as it absorbed moisture. It looked like an alien had exploded in the middle of her little champagne brunch setup. I let out a breath through my nose. Turned. Walked back inside. I didn't need to say anything. She knew. And now, she wouldn't just feel the cold in the air. She'd feel the sting of being outsmarted by the man she thought was too simple to fight back. And this was only the beginning. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Karen's backyard looked like a disaster zone. Bits of warped plastic from the melted lawn furniture stuck out from the edges of the fire pit like sad, drooping fingers. The brick enclosure had split in two jagged halves, a gaping, foam-coated chasm in the middle. Her patio umbrella lay collapsed and charred, its metal ribs twisted like broken limbs. And just like that, the HOA's queen of comfort had been dethroned. On its side, one leg fused into the bubbling remnants like a fly in amber. I watched from a distance with a cup of coffee in hand, savoring every second of the silence that had replaced her usual morning music and fake laugh brunches. The HOA president wasn't laughing now. By mid-morning, a pickup truck from the county fire department rolled in. A fire marshal stepped out, clipboard already in hand, and began pacing around the foam-covered patio with a puzzled look on his face. Karen trailed behind him in an oversized sun hat and a pair of sunglasses that barely hid the panic twisting her features. She was talking a mile a minute, gesturing toward the fire pit, pointing toward the fence, and trying to string together a narrative that didn't make her sound like the thief she was. I didn't need to be close to hear it. I knew exactly what story she was spinning. Probably some nonsense about a dangerous prankster neighbor or a defective wood supplier. Anything that didn't make her look like the person who stole another man's firewood and then used it without question. But the fire marshal kept shaking his head. He knelt down to inspect the foam, scraping a bit of it into a test vial, and then pointed toward the fence line. That's when I noticed him spotting the wildlife trail cam perched just above the tree post. He called Karen over. She hesitated. Then he pointed again. That camera had everything. The theft, the timestamp, her face in full color. I made sure the batteries were fresh the night before, and it had recorded in beautiful 1080p clarity. Every frame, every log, every wheelbarrow squeak, as she smugly stole from my stack. When the fire marshal crossed the property line to speak with me, he had the look of a man who already knew more than enough. He introduced himself professionally, asked if I had any recent visitors near the fence line, and then casually inquired about whether I'd noticed anything missing from my firewood pile. I nodded and told him the truth. 3 times this month someone had taken logs, I said. I didn't see who. It was at first, but I installed a trail cam to try and catch any wildlife or vandals. I offered to show him the footage. He agreed without hesitation. Inside the house, I pulled up the video on my laptop. As we watched Karen hauling away the logs with the grace of a raccoon digging through garbage, the fire marshal let out a low whistle. Then he looked at me and said, almost amused, that this would make his report very easy to write. I asked if I was in any sort of trouble for modifying the logs. He shook his head. Technically, he said, what you did wasn't dangerous. The foam isn't flammable, didn't cause any explosion, and it wasn't a booby trap. If anything, it was her own misuse that created the hazard. She took something from your property and burned it without knowing what it contained. The liability falls on her shoulders. Karen's mood changed rapidly after that. She stopped yelling and started whispering. Started pleading. I watched from the porch as she tried to pull the fire marshal aside and explain herself in hushed tones. Then she pointed at my camera again, possibly trying to argue that I'd set her up. But it was too late. The evidence was clear. And it wasn't on my side of the fence that the fire erupted. Later that afternoon, things started to get more interesting. One by one, the HOA board members who had been at her party began filing complaints. Turns out Karen had shared the firewood with several guests, used it for their fire pits too. And the foam didn't discriminate. One of the guests had smoke damage in their chimney. Another had their grill seals blown open. All of them were furious. The HOA Facebook group lit up with angry posts. Some blamed a defective wood source. Others questioned why Karen had unmarked firewood in the first place. A few pointed out that she didn't even have a permit to burn outdoors under the current winter advisory. By evening, an emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled. Karen tried to control the narrative, but cracks were already showing. One board member, a guy named Frank, who had always been her lapdog, suddenly found his voice and asked where she'd gotten the firewood. She paused, blinked, lied poorly, claimed she ordered it online. Frank looked at her like she'd just grown a second head and told everyone that he saw her pushing a wheelbarrow from my side of the fence. The room turned against her in a matter of minutes. Karen went from queen of the HOA to the woman who ruined 5 fire pits, caused a fire marshal investigation, and possibly violated 3 local ordinances. When someone suggested a vote of no confidence, I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how quickly the motion carried. It wasn't final yet, but her reign had cracked. She didn't take it well. That night, I heard footsteps near my fence again. But this time, I wasn't asleep. I sat in the dark by the window, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, watching her pace back and forth like a panther in a too-tight sweater. She stared at the logs still stacked beside the fence. She didn't dare touch them, but I could tell she wanted to. Not for heat, not for need, but for pride. That was the problem with Karen. It wasn't about the firewood. It was about control. She wanted everyone to fall in line, to act like her HOA was the law, not just a group of overeager busybodies with a clipboard and a superiority complex. She couldn't handle that someone had outwitted her. Before she left, she sprayed something on my barn wall. I didn't need to check to know what it was. The next morning, in big, sloppy red letters, someone had written HOA trash. It was juvenile, pathetic, and beneath the dignity of her title, which, thankfully, she wouldn't hold much longer. As I hosed the paint off, I smiled. She had taken the bait, walked right into the trap, and now she was unraveling in plain sight. And I had more foam, a whole shelf full if she wanted another lesson. The following days unfolded like a slow-motion car crash, with Karen doing everything in her power to claw back the control she'd lost. But the more she tried, the deeper she dug her own grave. I kept my distance, mostly out of amusement, occasionally out of strategy. There was no need to say much when her own mess kept getting louder. She was unraveling in front of her HOA board, her neighbors, and half the county. Her fire pit fiasco had made its way into the local newspaper, buried in the police report section under the headline, "Unusual foam explosion raises eyebrows in Fairove Estates." They didn't name her, but anyone in town who'd seen her backyard knew exactly who it was. Karen didn't take that well. The next morning, she marched down the sidewalk in one of her power suits. Clipboard in hand like nothing had happened, she went door to door issuing citations, most of them nonsense. One neighbor got written up for decorative lawn clutter because of a gnome collection. Another got cited for overgrown hedges that were trimmed just last week. She even tried to pin me for improper wood storage, which would have been hilarious if it weren't so desperate. I didn't flinch, let her bury herself. She was acting like a wounded animal that thought the more it bit, the more power it kept. That afternoon, a knock came on my door. It was a man in a pressed shirt and khakis holding a yellow notepad. Code enforcement. Karen had filed 3 reports: improper storage of combustible materials, hazardous waste, unauthorized chemical usage. I invited him and handed him a cup of coffee and took him out back to see the wood pile. He examined everything closely, nodding at my clear labeling, the weather-protected tarp, and the absence of anything that even smelled like a violation. Then I showed him the Original packaging for the expanding foam non-toxic used in barns completely legal. He asked me why someone would be burning foam-filled logs. I said I didn't know. He grinned and said that wasn't my problem, then folded the reports in half and stuffed them in his back pocket. Karen, of course, didn't stop there. That evening, her landscaper rolled in with a leaf blower, sweeping the sidewalk between our properties like it was a public plaza. Except he wasn't aiming for leaves. He angled the nozzle up and sent a cloud of dust, dirt, and dry mulch straight over my garden bed. I watched the whole thing from the kitchen window. The wind was calm. It wasn't an accident. My tomatoes were coated, my herbs ruined for the week. I walked out slowly, arms crossed, and asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. He shrugged and said Karen told him to clear the walkway. It would have been easy to yell. Instead, I took out my phone and recorded the whole thing. Then I sent the footage to the HOA board's group email. The one Karen had proudly posted about months ago when she upgraded transparency in neighborhood operations. The email I sent was short, no accusations, just a video clip, and a line beneath it: Karen's landscaping company doing precision dust attacks on my side of the fence. Please advise if this falls under HOA landscaping guidelines. 2 board members responded within the hour. One said they'd look into it. The other replied with nothing but a facepalm emoji. Later that night, I saw a black SUV parked outside Karen's house with its headlights off. 2 silhouettes sat inside. They weren't neighbors. 15 minutes later, they were gone. The next morning, I got a call from an insurance adjuster. Apparently, Karen had filed a claim for damages to her fire pit, citing defective materials and property sabotage. Her story was thin, and the insurance company had already gotten wind of the trail cam footage. They asked if I'd be willing to provide a statement. I agreed, and I sent them a copy of the footage along with a timestamp log of all 3 times my firewood had gone missing. They thanked me and said Karen's claim was under review for fraud. I knew then that she wasn't just trying to retaliate out of pride anymore. She was panicking. She was trying to cover her losses before they turned into something worse. That kind of desperation doesn't go unnoticed in a small journey story with correct punctuation and without heading community, especially not one where the HOA president is supposed to be the example everyone else follows. 2 days later, a surprise HOA inspection was scheduled. Normally, they send a notice. Not this time. A small group of board members and Karen herself came walking up my gravel driveway with clipboards, phones, and a printed checklist. Karen didn't speak. She just nodded at my shed, my barn, my log pile. She was hoping to find anything out of order, but I was ready. My firewood was perfectly stacked, stored with clearance, labeled and dry. My barn had just been cleaned, the floor swept, tools arranged. She lingered near the shed, sniffing the air like she expected to smell chemicals. All she got was cedar and motor oil. When they left, one of the newer board members, a younger woman named Elise, paused at the edge of the driveway. She looked embarrassed to be there. I asked her quietly why the inspection had been so sudden. She leaned in and whispered, Karen's trying to make a case that you're running a hazardous operation. She said, you have industrial chemicals back here, some kind of weaponized foam. Elise looked like she didn't even believe it herself. I chuckled and told her the only thing weaponized on my property was my temper. When people steal from me, she didn't laugh, but she did nod before walking away. The next morning, Karen's own driveway was covered in cardboard boxes. Return labels from an online fire pit store were scattered around her trash bin. She tried to send it back, but no one wanted it, probably because it was still oozing remnants of foam. A final blow came later that afternoon, when an email went out to the entire HO. It was from Frank, the board treasurer. The subject line read, Special Board Vote Interim Leadership Proposal. The message was short and devastating. It stated that due to recent actions, complaints, and pending legal issues involving the HOA president, a vote would be held to consider temporarily relieving her of duties until the matters could be fully resolved. It included a poll link and a list of recent incident summaries, including the foam fire, the board complaints, the insurance situation, and most damning, the trail cam footage. Karen didn't show her face for the rest of the day. Her hot tub was empty. The music was off. Her decorative flagpole, usually flying some obnoxious HOA pride banner, stood bare. The woman who once roamed the neighborhood like a queen was now boxed into her own silent castle. And the best part, my logs were still stacked exactly where they'd been the whole time, untouched, a quiet warning carved in wood and foam. The morning started with frost on the fence posts and a sense of calm that had been missing for a week. Birds chirped again, undisturbed by the usual Chorus of Karen's leaf blowers or barking commands from her patio. I stood at the barn door sipping coffee, watching a few cows stretch their necks at the rising sun, and thought maybe, just maybe, we'd hit a turning point. Then my phone buzzed. It was an email from my insurance company. Subject line: Firewood theft investigation confirmed incident. I opened it and read the formal confirmation that Karen's claim had been rejected due to fraudulent information and unauthorized use of insured property. The footage I provided, the timestamps, and even the weather reports had been enough to paint a full picture. Not only was she on the hook for damages, but they had flagged her policy for potential investigation at the state level. That was just the start. I'd kept quiet for long enough, let her walk all over people with her HOA badge and her condescending lectures, but now it was time to tighten the screws. Karen didn't know that my firewood wasn't just logs for personal use. My setup had a documented agricultural function. The wood heated a backup water supply for my livestock during cold snap. It was part of a larger energy efficiency grant I received 2 years ago. That meant when she took my logs, she wasn't just stealing from a neighbor, she was interfering with livestock safety infrastructure, which under local farm protections was a serious offense. With everything now documented, I called the county agricultural office and filed a formal complaint. They took it seriously. Within hours, a representative called back asking for video evidence and photos. I gave them everything. That afternoon, I saw Karen pacing in her driveway, talking loudly on her phone. She wasn't even trying to hide her frustration. She waved her arms wildly, gestured toward my property, then toward her ruined fire pit, and finally toward her mailbox. I didn't know it at the time, but she just received a letter from the fire marshal. Journeyed a story with correct punctuation and without heading, with a warning citation attached: improper burn practices, unauthorized open flame use, and failure to report hazardous material damage. She wasn't being fined yet, but it was close. And if there was one thing Karen hated more than losing power, it was being publicly held accountable. Around sunset, another twist showed up in the form of a man in a sheriff's uniform. He pulled into my driveway slowly, stepped out, and introduced himself politely. Said he was following up on a report of suspected theft and property damage. Apparently, the agricultural office had kicked it up the chain. I explained the whole situation, showed him the original footage again, provided timestamps, and even walked him through how the expanding foam worked. He scratched his chin, whistled low, and said, "Well, if Karen had stolen anything else off the property recently, I should let them know." I said, "No, but the last 3 firewood incidents were part of the same ongoing issue." He nodded, said it looked pretty clear from his side, and left with a copy of the footage on a thumb drive. The next day, the HOA board met again, this time without Karen. She'd been suspended pending the results of the vote, and now the board was considering a more permanent solution. Elise, the same board member who'd warned me earlier, stopped by my gate with a batch of cookies. She looked tired but relieved. She told me Karen had tried to bully the board into siding with her, claimed she was being targeted, and even accused me of planting illegal materials on her property. Elise said the board was tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the inspections, tired of her controlling everything like it was her personal kingdom. I offered her a seat on the porch and asked what she thought would happen next. She smiled faintly and said the members would vote, and if it went how she expected, Karen wouldn't be the president by the weekend. That evening, I decided to host something I hadn't done in years: a bonfire night. Nothing formal, just a gathering of neighbors, some hot cider, grilled sausages, and acoustic music. I stacked real firewood, clean and safe, out in the pasture behind the barn. I strung up lights between fence posts and sent word through the grapevine. No HOA invitation needed. The turnout was surprising. Over 24 people came, some bringing their own food or chairs, others just curious to be part of something that didn't come with HOA fees and sour looks. We laughed. We told stories. And for once, people who'd only waved from their porches had actual conversations. They asked about my cattle, my old Ford pickup, the rotating solar heater I built from scrap metal. We didn't mention Karen, not at first. But by the time the second batch of cider was brewing, people were sharing their own stories. The surprise inspections, the threatening emails, the fines over mailbox paint colors and fence height. Karen's reign hadn't made the neighborhood better, it had made it quiet. Not peaceful, just scared. Halfway through the evening, we heard a car engine rev and slow down out front. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Karen's SUV crept past the fence line, windows dark, tires crunching the gravel like it was bones. She didn't stop, just drove slowly, watching from inside like a ghost trying to haunt something she'd lost. A few people waved sarcastically. A few just shook their heads. I didn't move. I let her look, let her see what she no longer controlled. The next morning, I found tire tracks near the old fence gate. Not from her SUV, smaller, probably from a bike or scooter. Someone had thrown a bag of marshmallows over the fence. Each one stuck with a toothpick flag that read "Traitor." I picked them up one by one, dropped them in the trash, and didn't say a word. That's the thing about bullies. They hate silence.
They want a response.
But when they get nothing back, it drives them even more insane. Later that day, the sheriff called again. He said they were finalizing the report and needed a formal statement from me at the station. Nothing serious yet, but Karen might be contacted soon for questioning. He chuckled and said she was already threatening lawsuits against the Firewood company, the foam manufacturer, and me. But none of them held weight. The facts were simple. She stole property, misused it, and caused her own damage. The foam, legal. The theft, documented. The only thing she had now was a bad reputation and a backyard that looked like a failed science experiment. As I hung up the phone and stepped back outside, I caught a chill in the air, but not from the weather. It was the kind of chill you get when you know someone's still out there, stewing, waiting for a chance to strike again. I went back to the barn, pulled one more hollowed-out log from the stash, and placed it neatly on the top of the pile. Just one. Just in case she couldn't help herself. It was a still morning. The kind where the air feels like glass, cold and delicate. The sky was clear. No clouds in sight. And the world had that quiet tone that usually meant something was about to shift. I stood at the edge of the pasture, sipping hot black coffee and watching the steam curl up and vanish into nothing. The firewood stack stood untouched. A full week had passed without any logs disappearing. Not one wheelbarrow trail. No rustling in the night. No mysterious footprints.
Just calm.
Almost too calm.
Calm.
Karen hadn't been seen much since the HOA board's vote finalized. The result wasn't even close. 14 votes for removal, 1 abstention, 0 in her favor. Her title was stripped, her board seat vacated, her email access revoked. She was no longer president of anything except the HOA's biggest embarrassment. Elise was named interim chair. She stopped by with a thank you basket that included a homemade pie and a handwritten note. I kept the pie and burned the note. I didn't need recognition. I just wanted my land, my firewood, and a quiet winter. But Karen, as usual, couldn't let it go. That kind of woman doesn't just disappear quietly. She smolders.
She plans. She waits.
And then she strikes, when everyone thinks the story's already over. That's exactly what she tried to do. 2 nights after the board voted her out, my dog Red started barking at something near the fence. Not his usual annoyed bark. It was sharper, urgent, the kind he used when coyotes circled the barn. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out, boots crunching frost, breath fogging up in the beam of light. I followed Red to the woodpile. Nothing seemed out of place until I looked closer and noticed a strange glint beneath one of the top logs. A small black device, wedged between 2 split pieces. It took a second to realize it was a camera. Not a wildlife cam, a compact, motion-activated unit, probably with a night vision mode. She'd planted it there, likely hoping to catch me reloading my foam trick. Hoping she could spin a new narrative. Maybe use it for another claim, or to accuse me of malicious intent. I smiled. She was running out of tools. Planting cameras, spying through fences, trying to bait me into a mistake. That was desperation, not power. I removed the camera carefully and tossed it into the empty feed barrel by the barn. Let her come ask for it. I'd be happy to explain that too. The next day, the sheriff returned. This time he wasn't here just for a chat. He had a warrant for a formal statement and a copy of the insurance fraud investigation summary. Karen's actions were now on record with both the sheriff's department and the county prosecutor. He said charges weren't filed yet, but she was officially a subject of interest. He asked if I'd be willing to testify if needed. I said I would, but I hoped it wouldn't come to that. He laughed and said, with people like her, it always comes to that. The neighborhood started to change after that. People became more open, friendly. One by one, neighbors I'd barely spoken to began waving, stopping by with greetings, asking about cattle feed or winter prep. Without Karen breathing down their necks, people exhaled for the first time in years. The gnome collector across the street brought over a fruitcake. The retired couple next door offered to help mend part of my fence. Kids started playing in yards again. Chalk drawings appeared on sidewalks. And for once, the place felt like a community, not a gated rulebook. But Karen wasn't done. Her last move came quietly, under the radar, like she was trying to slip a knife between the ribs without anyone noticing. She tried to file a civil suit against me for damages to her property and emotional distress. I found out through a mailed notice, hand-delivered by a process server, who looked embarrassed to be holding the envelope. The accusations were laughable. She claimed I had lured her into taking the wood, that I had used chemical agents without proper labeling, that I had exhibited a pattern of aggressive rural behavior. Her lawyer must have gotten the phrases from a soap opera. I didn't even blink. I sent the notice straight to my attorney, a fourth-generation ranch lawyer who knew more about boundary law than anyone alive. He laughed when he read it and told me this was just noise. Karen knew she was cornered and wanted to stir the pot one last time before the lid clamped shut. He filed a counterclaim backed by every video, photo, and report we had collected over the past month. It was a mountain of proof, and Karen had nothing to stand on except broken bricks and a smoking insurance letter. 3 days later, the case was dismissed before it ever reached court. The judge threw it out as meritless. Karen was fined for wasting the court's time. Her reputation, what little remained, crumbled overnight. The same neighbors who once feared her wouldn't even look her way anymore. Her house became the quietest on the block. The hot tub drained. The patio lights dimmed. Her pride, it seemed, had finally burned itself out. The story ended not with a scream or a bang, but with a whisper. I went out back, picked up that last foam-filled log I'd saved just in case, and placed it on the burn pile behind the barn. I wouldn't need it anymore. Karen wouldn't be back. Not with the law breathing down her neck. Not with the HOA turned against her. Not with her social media accounts deleted and her mailbox full of returned letters. Still, as I watched the flames slowly curl up from the burn pile and catch the edge of that last log, I couldn't help but smile. That log had been a symbol, a warning, a message in plain sight. Don't take what isn't yours. Don't poke the man who chops his own firewood. Don't assume silence means surrender. When the log finally hissed and cracked and crumbled into ash, I tipped my hat to it and walked away.